Hi, and thank you for joining us today to learn more about climate. I'm Lucy Noble, and I've dedicated the last 11 years of my career in reducing greenhouse gas emissions through developing innovative programs and creative campaigns to shift users to more sustainable travel modes. And now I want to bring awareness about environmental issues and the urgent need to address climate change. I'll be talking to experts in this field and sharing key insights in bite-sized pieces with you. And today we're talking to Steve Lemeshow. Steve has spent the last 5 years working in the voluntary carbon markets, first as a buyer with Waze, then as a regenerative agriculture project developer with Siebel Technologies, and most recently as a marketplace and software provider with Cloverly. Now, Steve is making another jump back to the project development side as a consultant with eco-engineers. Hi, Steve, again, and welcome. And could you tell us, why are you interested in climate?
Sure. So, I started to get interested in climate change really when I was back in high school. Even back then, I had started to, I think, notice subtle changes and, heard some of the warnings from scientists that, we'd be dealing with things like, droughts and storms and, was sufficiently terrified by, like so many other people, an inconvenient truth, which I saw, I think, my senior year of high school. And so that really inspired me to actually study, climate change and environmental science at UNC. And my goal at the time was really to kind of put that together with business and try and build out kind of the incentives to see this industry grow. So, I started my career in clean energy and then spent 9+ years at Google doing a variety of things, including programmatic advertising. But then at the tail end, clean transportation, which is where Lucy and I got to know each other a little bit when I was with Waze. And, at the end of my time at Waze, I started to focus more on carbon finance and how, we could incentivize the partners that we were working with at Waze to engage in, supporting projects beyond, the transportation programs that we were engaging with them about, to ultimately then, drive additional action and completely neutralize any emissions associated with, getting people to and from work. So, from there, I ended up spending several years developing a regenerative ag project with a company called Siebel Technologies, which you can think of as a technology provider. They do, carbon modeling in soil ecosystems, as well as remote sensing to verify practices remotely. And through the kind of combinations of those technologies, we were able to actually build out programs to enroll farmers into our program and incentivize them to adopt new practices, things like cover crop, adding a cover crop to their fields in off seasons, adding, building to their rotations, reducing tillage. And through those, we were able to reduce a significant amount of emissions associated with the growing of typically commodity crops like corn and soy. From there, I spent 1.5 years with a company called Cloverly, building software, helping companies to sell their carbon credits. So you can think of Cloverly as sort of a combination of a software provider as well as a marketplace to help credits be commercialized and to provide easy access for buyers to those credits. And then finally, I'm making another jump back to the world of project development with a company called eco-engineers. Rather than focusing specifically on one project methodology or pathway like regenerative agriculture, this will be cross methodologies, and we'll be helping projects get off the ground, helping them design, their projects and, write new methodologies, put together the necessary documentation, et cetera. So it's very exciting.
That's great. And remind me, what is carbon financing, carbon credits? I hear that in the news a lot, and you're talking about it a lot. Can you help define it so our listeners know what exactly we're talking about?
Sure. So, you can think of carbon finance as a funding mechanism that places a value on carbon emissions. And so, companies that are looking to neutralize their carbon footprint can actually go and purchase offsets or carbon credits, which are typically 1 metric ton of CO2. And when they buy a carbon credit, they're essentially supporting a project that has created that carbon credit through a reduction of emissions or potentially a removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. And so, that's kind of how the sort of most general sort of description of the way that carbon finance works.
And are these markets mandatory, voluntary, owned by the government, private? How's the market like?
So there are both, regulated compliance markets and voluntary carbon markets. When we say carbon market, we're typically referring to the combination of both of those, sort of dynamics. So when we think about a compliance market, there's a compliance market in California. There's a European carbon market that's also regulated, but most transactions that are occurring in carbon markets are voluntary. And so generally speaking, what that means is that the action that's being taken typically by companies is completely voluntary. They're not required to take that action, but it may be demanded of them by stakeholders, by employees, or just because they want to do the right thing. And so they're taking that upon themselves to take action and participate in these markets to support projects and ultimately reduce emissions.
So can you tell us who's participating in these voluntary carbon markets?
So at the highest level, you can think of, there are suppliers and there are buyers of carbon credits. And, the suppliers are the projects themselves that are, reducing or, removing carbon from the atmosphere. These are, all sorts of different projects. There are projects that could be, protecting forests or growing new forests. So there are sort of nature-based solutions. As I mentioned, there are projects in the regenerative agriculture space that are incentivizing new, more sustainable practices, or not even really new. These practices have been around for a long time, but they're more expensive. And, we need to pay growers to do them because the status quo is a little less expensive and ultimately more damaging for the environment. There are industrial processes that can be tweaked with either different materials or processes that also, again, are potentially more expensive, but if done and adopted, can help significantly reduce the amount of emissions required. And then finally, there's a sort of growing group of pure play carbon removal projects that follow a bunch of different methodologies and pathways. A lot of people have heard of things like direct air capture, which are giant fans that pull air through membrane, and then it sort of is able to isolate carbon in a way that can then be either injected into underground wells or in some cases stored above ground. There's enhanced rock weathering, which is a process by which rock like basalt or olivine is spread on fields, and then through the natural process of the water cycle and rain falling on those fields, the CO2 weathers and kind of then rushes off into the waterway and ends up at the bottom of the ocean. So there are all sorts of different growing and budding new pathways that can have an enormous impact, but many of them, and I mean really all of them, need financial support in order to exist and scale. And so again, that's on the supply side. Now on the demand side, there are buyers who are typically companies that are looking to reduce their emissions or reduce their carbon footprint in some way or another. And so these companies are oftentimes looking for carbon credits that are high integrity, high quality, or meet a specific set of needs. Things like, proximity to their operations, or in some cases could exist within their own value chain. And that's where we get into sort of this intersection of offsets and what some people call insets, which is much more specific to a company's own operations. And then, there are all sorts of other organizations that are popping up in the voluntary carbon market to support the industry. So, there's registries out there that they sort of set the ground rules for how, a project can be verified and certified and credits, ultimately issued and bought and sold. These registries, some people may have heard of Verra or Climate Action Reserve or Gold Standard. There's several of them. And they help bring integrity, right? So that way, a project developer can't make a claim that is completely unverified. There are some rules that they're following to ultimately bring some degree of credibility to it. There are third parties that also review, the projects and help bring, help reduce risk for potential buyers. There are software developers like Cloverly that, help project developers to, project how much inventory they'll have or to manage their credits and the process of selling them successfully. And lots of other organizations that are really supporting this sort of new ecosystem and helping it thrive.
That's great. That's amazing that this whole ecosystem is here for us to help with the climate change. And so, in your opinion, what in the supplier side, what kind of technology or emerging technology has really evolved in the last few years to help with creating more, I guess, on the supplier side to remove carbon?
So, I mean, there's both the project development technologies and then, the supporting technologies. So on the project development side, again, there are new processes that are being developed right now to help, again, pull carbon out of the atmosphere more efficiently, more successfully, more securely, so that there's sort of permanent sequestration. So the R&D is happening right now, and it's happening really rapidly. Separately, there's a lot of new technology that sometimes people refer to as MRV, or monitoring, reporting, and verification. And this is sort of the supporting technology that helps bring more credibility to the process of generating carbon credits. When we start thinking about monitoring, like these are the tools that are used to track how much carbon has been avoided or removed, to track its sequestration, and that can take all sorts of different shapes. Whether that's sensors or satellite imagery or the machine learning and processing that's required to actually look at that imagery and make sense of it. And that, I think, goes sort of hand in hand with a lot of the requirements from registries, to be able to, again, demonstrate that your project does what it claims to do. And then separately, the just necessary reporting and software platforms that are coming, that are being created to help companies, particularly on the buy side, make efficacious claims about how they're the action that they're taking. And so these are all sorts of different MRV technologies that exist across all of these different dozens of methodological pathways, and they're getting better and better every day.
That's great to hear. And so for our listeners, are there any resources or websites that you recommend for them if they wanted to learn more about carbon credits and carbon accounting?
So there's lots. I would say I love podcasts, and so I'll mention a few that I think are really great. My Climate Journey is one that I certainly have spent a lot of time listening to. There are, at this point, I think hundreds of episodes with founders in the climate tech world, talking about how they grew their companies, and I think that you can just learn a ton by following along there. Dave Roberts, his podcast Volts is fantastic. Very wonky, so sometimes they get into the weeds a little bit, which again, for us nerds, I think is awesome. So definitely highly recommend Dave Roberts and Volts. The Catalyst with Shel Khan is great. Also pretty wonky, and they've even done some crossover episodes with the two of them. Really great content there. I'd say there's certainly some episodes that touch on carbon finance specifically, but it's also, in both cases, I think on the Volt side, there's a lot of renewable energy talk. On the Catalyst side, it's more sort of climate tech and investing and so forth. Those are really great. When I first was starting to kind of make my transition back when I was still with Google and Waze, I was listening to a lot of Nori's podcasts, and they have a few different ones now, but they really kind of track their whole journey, from soup to nuts as they were kind of going through the process of starting their company. And I learned a ton about regenerative ag through that process. They brought in all sorts of experts and sort of just really shared their journey with the listeners. As far as other resources go, I love the Drawdown books and the content that they've created. I think it's really great. They have a good coffee table book, which I always have with me. It's like the top, I think, 150 solutions to climate change, kind of stack ranked and ordered, with data and an overview of the different projects. I think for all of these different carbon projects and pathways, there's an entry and drawdown that can kind of describe it and help people evaluate what can really, where should we be focusing most of our effort. And in some cases, it's not where you'd expect, right? It's not the things that you hear about most, even though there are some like direct air capture that have a huge opportunity in the future. There's a lot of things that we could do much more of today to have a huge impact and take a big chunk out of climate change.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And before we go, do you have last advice or call to action for some of our listeners? What can they do today to help do something towards climate action, climate change right now?
So I think there's a lot of first of all, we need great people. We need more people coming to this space and dedicating their careers. I mean, I spent a bunch of time when I was at Google kind of on the side thinking about this and, trying to take some action, but ultimately there was only so much I could do in the, hours that I had left in my day. And so dedicating, my career to this full time was a big first step. And I think we need, anyone who's thinking about what they want to do next, I would encourage them to look at, the projects that are required, on the ground to make this climate action happen. And then all of the other kind of providers that are, popping up, whether it's, third-party ratings agencies or registries or others, the software startups that can help make this industry go and make it more efficient are all really critical. Separately, you can buy carbon credits, right? You can go through the exercise of, kind of calculating what your own footprint looks like. I had a friend do this for their wedding, or I've had other people do it for specific events, and it's fairly straightforward now. It's much more accessible than it was years ago to go and purchase credits, and you have a choice of projects to support. And I think that's a really great way to take action as well.
That's a really great idea of like, if you have a birthday party or wedding, instead of bringing gifts, it's like, hey, let's contribute to buying some carbon credits, especially for those who are, maybe spending more carbon because they're flying or traveling to the wedding. For an individual, where would they buy carbon credits?
So there are several platforms out there that you can go engage with and purchase directly. Cloverly, my former employer, is one of them. They have I think they at this point have close to 100 projects that you can choose from. But there are other marketplaces out there as well that you can go and purchase credits from. I think it's really good and I think responsible to learn about the projects that you're supporting and make sure that they resonate with you. And again, there are lots to choose from, and some have different advantages than others. Again, when it comes to carbon removal, these are projects that oftentimes do really well from a permanence perspective, and that once it's been removed, it's permanent. Whereas there are others that are protecting forests that have other co-benefits that really have a big impact, like protecting biodiversity and ensuring that these natural ecosystems are protected. So again, I would do the research, look at these projects, and then promote them to all the friends and family out there that you think could also add value.
Yeah, definitely. Like, even just talking about it with your friends and family, especially during this holiday, as you're getting together, will really be a great topic to talk about what people can do on a regular basis. Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for that very insightful discussion. And to our audience, if there's a particular topic related to climate change that you're passionate about or curious to learn more about, please leave a comment below. Your input helps shapes our future episodes and ensure that we're covering the issues that are most important to you. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next week for another insightful discussion. And together, let's explore solutions and take action for a healthier planet. Thank you, and